I'll just preface this by saying, thanks to the Singapore team, we've been doing a lot of thinking in this space and running a lot of projects around citizen engagement that are helping us to think through this more. So it's not just about my own thoughts here. This is really a team presentation. We live in a world where we can't actually take for granted anymore that our societies work the way that we think that they did. There's been a massive change in how we connect and how we communicate with one another that is actually changing the relationships between people in our imagined communities that are different nations in our societies. So enter Thinkplace. For the last 20 years, in fact, since the start of this millennium, we have been working our way into this space through a variety of different means. There's many ingredients in our toolkit. But I think as that journey progressed, we started to settle on this idea that what we're really about is how do we master design in complex systems? And as I said, that toolkit has been evolving to the point that I think now it's time for a step change, because we can now start designing at scale on a whole of society basis, much more part of political processes, and with a strong intent to actually change the fundamentals of our society and our economy and our culture and our environment. So I want you to imagine that, in a few years' time, we might be invited to help redesign the UN Security Council and the global security apparatus, that we could be working on redesigning economic valuation systems and national accounts, that we could be redesigning major platforms that are around how information flows in our community, and that we may be involved in redesigning national constitutions, parliaments, and some of that big picture of how governance works in our societies. Another way of talking about that shift that I think we're in the middle of making at the moment is this model that we've created. The bottom layer is around socially conscious design, and everything that we do at Thinkplace is about public value and public impact at one level. So everything that we're designing, and many of the talks that you've heard today are around, as we're designing, how do we think through the societal implications of these things? So everything we do shifts the needle a little bit in society. If we go up a level, though, I think increasingly a space that Thinkplace is working in is wicked problems. And these are cross-cutting, usually thematic-based issues that we need to deal with on a whole of society basis. But they are fundamentally about a particular issue, like climate change, like aging populations, or family violence, for example. The space that I'm really interested in pushing further into is a layer up from that. It's the fundamental settings, the governance, the structures that actually set how we tackle some of those wicked problems. Not all of them are national, some of them are actually international. And I think that's the space that increasingly we need to be ready to design in, because it's what's been called for at the moment. So my big idea that I'm pitching today, I guess, is that I think we need to quickly build the manifesto for full-scale design of societies, and to bring together this toolkit in a way that works and take our version of design up another level. I think for most of us, the medium of design is quite familiar. So the various things that we'd need to traverse to do this, we've been practicing in our different ways across our different studios. But I think what's different is the way that we can bring that together to achieve scaled impact. And this is things like, on the people side, we're traversing stories and beliefs that drive how our societies work, the norms and values and how people assess things and think about things. It's roles and identities, and we've just heard some excellent talks about roles and identities in our society. And it's the relationships, how people connect, and the behaviours. So that's fabric of our society. But I think on the other side, we can think about the platform that our societies provide for those people. And that's where we get into some of the issues like rules and governance, which Thinkplace has a strong history in designing, around power and authority, which is something that we always pay attention to in co-design processes, and how to balance power and balance cross power. Measuring and outcomes, I think, is another really interesting space that actually connects together with the norms and values on the people side. And places and spaces, which can be everything from placemaking, which is something that Thinkplace Singapore has been involved in recently, but also virtual online spaces where discourse is happening, how people are connecting, and even the spaces where the governance and where a parliament sits, for example. So this is the medium of the society designer that I think we need to continue to build our toolkit for. As we're making this shift, I think it means that some of the models that we've held true are going to need to evolve. So I've deliberately taken our 4 voices here and crossed out the original words, because we're finding a much more nuanced version of this is required for particularly the citizen engagement projects that we're doing. So intent is not always the government. It's change makers with that intent to change alongside power brokers who have formal or informal authority. As always, we're trying to connect that to the lived experience, the ground truth, the people who we are designing for and with, and increasingly empowering them to control the design process. I think another difference is that it's not just about the lived experience, it's often about the representation of a community. So more of what we've done has gone into the space of deliberative practice, which means creating bodies of citizens that are representative, not just of the experience we're designing for, but of the will of society itself. And I think the big change we need to make is around the expertise cluster. So it means bringing in experts with deep relevant knowledge, which might mean economists, political scientists, environmental scientists. It's capability with people who have the tools to actually do things. I heard Nina talk before about green swans and around investment funds and finance, for example, as a way to scale some of this. And here in Singapore, I've talked to people who do billion-dollar deals, and that's an amazing toolkit. It's a space we haven't played in before, but if we're genuine about designing at this level, we are talking about capital at that size. It's the resources to implement and scale, and I think that brings us to our role as brokers who can facilitate and coordinate this design, and makers who can create and represent these designs and broker these other voices to be effective. And I think probably the other big difference is increasingly it is about the platforms, the ecosystems, the networks that we create and leave behind, and less about the design blueprint itself. It's actually the act of coming together and designing that is actually the deliverable. So as I said, we're going to need a bigger network. So what's next? So we are about to launch a microsite to call for more people to get involved in this space. I don't think this is a Thinkplace story alone. If we're genuine about building the manifesto, that means building a thought leadership network. And so we've got some salon series we want to run. We're potentially moving towards a conference like this, but actually building the manifesto. And I'm guided here by the creation of the Agile Manifesto, a similar sense of people who came together to codify a way of working. And I think the reason for all of this is when they, which can be all sorts of different theys, asked to redesign democracies and redesign governance and redesign societies, we at Thinkplace need to be ready to respond to that call. We're doing it at the moment through various projects, but I think the next step up, we have the opportunity to lift our ambition and take on these design challenges the next level up. And that for me is Thinkplace Society. Thanks very much. That's me.